we talked in one of the earlier calls that innovation, the fact that we have a desire for innovation means that we need change. We need something to grow. We need to move. We need to reach more people. We need to reach a new demographic. And two of the elements of innovation that never will go away, we said, were generosity and humility. And I was talking to a friend of mine about the generosity side of things, because you don't have innovation unless somebody's courageously generous to offer up ideas, creativity, go out on a limb, take a risk. And that idea of generosity, sometimes when you're innovating, people think they need to do it in secret. Like, we need to develop our secret sauce, and then, like, as we protect it, like, it'll get better. But the truth is, I learned this from Bill Johnson years ago. The only things in the kingdom you get to keep are the things you give away. And when you give it away, God enlarges what you have and makes it better, and it becomes more clear. There was a farmer out in the Midwest that every single year he would win the Blue Ribbon Award for the best corn in the Midwest. Every year, hands down, he would win county fair, the state competition. He was just had the best corn in his field. And people were shocked at what he decided to do. He decided to give his, now I don't even know anything really about growing corn. I didn't know you had like secret kernels or secret little things that you do to, to grow the best corn, but I'm sure they do. I'm just ignorant of that industry. But this farmer decided to have generosity. Instead of hoarding his secret corn, he decided to give bags and bags and bags of seed to all of his surrounding neighbors. And partially it was, self-motivated in the fact that he said, their corn blows back into my field. So I want everyone around me to have the best corn possible. And there's a kingdom value, I think, in that, where when you are generous with your ideas and generous with what God is doing in your life and in your ministry, God only rewards that. And, it's the idea that when the water level rises, all the boats rise with it. And so what makes me passionate for innovation is not just doing something better for myself or our team or this narrow group or even just within Elam, but in a broader context, like, how many people can we help win and innovate? And there's the generosity side of innovation. But I want to drill down on the humility side of innovation, because, man, there was a lot that I have realized over the past couple of years about innovation that I never really understood. One of them is, again, when you're desperate for innovation, it's usually because you're the most frustrated person. Like, you know that something could be done better, and so you're like the chief frustrated officer. Like, you are just, I don't know, you just know things can get better, but you don't know how to do it, right? And so, but a lot of times we can project that onto our teams and onto our people, where we expect them to change and go through like the painful internal process of changing more than we sign ourselves up to change. And the truth is that if you're a leader of a team or a leader of anything, things are the way they are because you are the way you are. So you have to actually humble yourself and say, I can't expect everyone else around me to change. I have to change. I am a guilty party in creating some of the status quo that's around us. And so I can't just challenge my team to think more creatively and take more risks. I actually have to adopt a new mindset myself. I have to humble myself to do that. James Allen said that people are anxious to change their circumstances, but unwilling to change themselves. Therefore, they remain bound. Everyone wants innovation around them, but how many people are willing to courageously pursue innovation within them? Like, you and I, as the leaders, have to change. Jim Rohn said that if you will change, everything will change for you. It's so true. It's so true. And I just realized that a lot of times I was frustrated with maybe it was a lack of progress sometimes at Elam, or just different things in contexts that I've served in. But I didn't look in the mirror first. I looked at my team. I looked at the metrics. I looked at what wasn't happening. And I had to take more ruthless ownership and responsibility and just humility to say, I can't put the pain of change on just the people around me. I have to adopt it. And, you don't just get what you want, you get who you are. So I have to work on who I am as the leader and apply innovation thinking to myself first. I think that innovation, this is a part of innovation that's not talked about a whole lot. Innovation requires an incredibly healthy soul. Because again, innovation is just a context of frustration. There's going to be resistance, right? We said that what's new is almost always resisted by what's known. So there's going to be resistance. There's going to be frustration. There's going to be speculation. People are going to try to speculate on your motives, why you're trying to change something. There's going to be crucial confrontations. I think innovation is one scary conversation after another, and it's one bold confrontation after another, and it's one loving circling back to be understood again after another. It's like innovation will happen when you're willing to keep showing up and to keep allowing the Holy Spirit to do work on your soul so that you're healthy. I mean, you think about Moses. One of the reasons why he didn't go into the promised land is he just got to the point where he was toxic with his anger and so frustrated with the people that they wouldn't change. But God, held Moses responsible for his frustration level. And so I think a lot of times we don't talk about this, and I wasn't even going to mention it until this morning. I just thought, we've got to at least bring this subject up with innovation, because it really does require a healthy soul. Craig Rochelle said that leaders could really learn from their mistakes if they weren't too busy denying them. A lot of the greatest innovation comes from after you do something and it fails, but a lot of times we try to cover up the failure or just move on quickly rather than unpacking it, or maybe assign blame or whatever. But leaders really could learn a ton from their failures if we weren't so busy trying to deny them or move on from them quickly. And one of the things I've been challenged to do is to not trade the creative vision that you have for innovation for critical excuses. This is what will happen. Sometimes a leader of a team will say, I really think we could do this in our worship gatherings, or I really think we could go here in our creative arts, or we could raise this money, or we could add this new ministry. And what happens is someone on the team will say, well, our people just don't, you fill in the blank. Our people just don't come on time. Our people just don't respond to preaching. Our people just don't give. Our people just don't sign up to serve. Our people just don't do community groups. They're so busy, they just don't do community. And then they'll go beyond their people and they'll say, well, in our area just, and what I would say to you is, even if that's true, don't receive that as like the final gospel truth. Because every place I've ever gone to help churches, there is a stigma on our area. And listen, every area, every team has their things, their issue, whether it's the weather, it's mindsets, it's strongholds. But I think you've got to take responsibility before you project blame. I think we have to take the posture of, we have not yet led our people to coming on time. We have not yet led our people to prioritizing community. We have not yet led our people to responding to preaching. We have not yet led our people into an invite culture or generosity. Whatever the thing is you're trying to innovate, it's a quick, easy thing to make an excuse. But if you do that, you paralyze the momentum. You really won't, you won't be able to do it. And again, the process, just talking about it, can seem frustrating. I just want things to change. I just want our people to change. But the truth is, we have to look in the mirror. We have to change. We cannot afford to bring an old mindset into a new season, right? We can't afford to bring an old self-image of who you are as a leader and as a person into a new season. I want to read a quote to you from a leader that I follow, Paul Scanlon. He's from the UK. I love this. He mentioned this on Instagram 2 weeks ago, and I've just been thinking about this. He said, the ghosts of all the people you used to be are proud of who you've become and thank you for letting them go. We've got some old mindsets we've got to let go of. He said, all those former versions of you would like to thank you for not mistaking them as the final you. They don't miss you. They don't need to hear from you, nor do they want you to visit or to come back for vacation. It's all good. Leave that mindset, leave that self-image. If we're going to be aggressive leaders in the area of innovation, that means we have to upgrade our self-image and our mindset in every new season. We can't just project that onto the people and say, well, they need to change. Once they change, then we're going to have an awesome environment. When the truth is, we need some humility as leaders to change. So I'm not going to talk about some of the different drama in a few of the conversations. I posted a blog today on the 4 pillars of drama and I really encourage you to check it out. A coach in my life really kind of opened up this idea to me on how we create our own drama when we don't confront situations. And I think when you're desiring innovation, your frustration level can be at an all-time high with other people. I mean, you're like so frustrated that people are not changing, things are not happening. I'm just going to walk while we talk because my German Shepherd is barking at the window, and I don't want to bother you guys with that. You just play drama in your mind. You connect dots that don't need to be connected. I can think back to changes that I wanted to make in different seasons of ministry, and I expected different ministry leaders to initiate those changes, to come up with ideas, to roll them out with teams. And when things weren't happening, I would tell myself a story in my head as to why they weren't happening. And it was always easier to project it onto them than it was to take responsibility. And this coach in my life began to talk about how, we've got these pillars of drama, and, it's not gonna, it may make you feel good in the moment and you may feel justified, but you're not going to get the end result that you want, which is innovation. And so I want to challenge you to do whatever it takes to ask the Lord, what are some areas of my soul where I'm not healthy enough for the innovation that I'm praying for? Am I willing to have crucial conversations day in and day out, once again showing up at the table? Another thing with humility, I was so glad to see that Craig went to Grow and was growing with thousands of leaders at the last ARC event down in Alabama. You have to pay whatever price to put yourself in new environments and new experiences. And to be honest, Elam has done this throughout our whole history. We've never been locked off to any other part of the body of Christ. Anyone that manifests the Spirit of Christ, we're going to partner with. And so I think as innovators, we've got to expose ourselves to new experiences, new ideas, new people. I would write this in your notes. Innovation is often adapting someone else's breakthrough to your context. Innovation is often adapting someone else's breakthrough to your context. Now, you can't just take their breakthrough and just, slap it into your environment. You've got to adapt it to your context. But sometimes if you don't travel and if you don't meet with people and if you don't ask questions and if you just assume that other groups are whatever their people say they are, right? Because out of insecurity, people will tear down everybody else's creativity and everybody else's breakthrough and try to, find some reason why they are the way they are. I have found sometimes the most criticized different group pockets in the body of Christ. They don't have character. They don't have this. They're evangelistic, but they don't do missions well. I found that when I go visit those groups, I learn so much from them. I don't lose who I am and I don't lose my heritage, but I learn so much from them, and then I can adapt their breakthroughs into my context. And I think without those new conversations and new experiences and new people, like think about Peter in Acts 10. God had to send him Cornelius just so that he would have an experience with a new person and a new conversation and a new encounter with God so that he could innovate his thinking about reaching Gentiles. And thank God the whole, landscape of the church changed because of that new experience and new environment. So our job as leaders is to expose ourselves to things that are bigger, to things that stretch us, to things that we don't understand and that get us thinking. And that really does lead to some great innovation. I could pause there for some questions just on that first part, because I know that unpacking that. Here's our Prezi right there. Maybe we're all muted and we'll save our questions for the end.
We're trying to figure out our dates for our next webinar series. So
hey,
and saying hi.
Say hi to Pastor Chris, guys.
How you doing?
Good to see you.
Good to see you guys. Wonderful. I'm hearing awesome things about your webinar, and it's been a really great success. We've had good response through emails, and hi to everybody else. Good to see you all.
Good to see you too. We're excited that you're going to do a few weeks on Teams.
Yeah, Lord bless you guys. Right now I'm heading for Wednesdays, the first Wednesdays, but in November I'm going to be out of the country, so I'm going to do the Friday the first if possible. But right now it's the first Wednesdays.
Awesome.
So if that works out, we'll make it work.
We'll figure it out.
All right. See you guys.
We'll see you, Pastor Chris.
Thanks, Mr. Chris.
So let's pause just for a second. Any questions on that idea of generosity and humility and just the healthy soul required for ongoing innovation?
I have a question. How do I want to frame this? How do we, the humility thing is like a big thing in my mind. It's like, I know I'm not humble all the time. Personality issues, whatever, character flaws, Bill can attest. How do you take, though, you say, well, I'm not leading people in the right way. To me, the pendulum to that is people not taking responsibility for their actions, and then we take all the burden of people's bad choices. So I guess, like, how do we balance that? Like, I don't know, like I've had I don't know, I'll just leave it at that.
I think I don't want to take the responsibility off of anybody's shoulders on my teams. They have to grow and they have to deliver on what's expected of them, and they should really exceed expectations, right? However, I found that a lot of times in my own lack or in my own inability, lack of self-awareness, blindness, I would put more pressure on them than I put on myself. And I would think that they're responsible to bring change and innovation, when the truth is, I put them in charge, or I asked them to be on this team. And I am also sowing into the old system because I helped create it. So now I need to help dismantle it. And I need to, and again, we think that innovation just comes from ideas and systems and those things. And we'll talk about that in a second because they're absolutely necessary. However, innovation never happens until there's a new mindset in the leader. And to do that requires humility. To do that requires you to show up, look in the mirror, and ask God, where have I just not grown in my thinking and just kind of settled in or plateaued and conveniently projected pressure onto other people to bring changes when I have to go through the same pain that they are? Because a lot of times when you're the leader wanting to bring innovation, we just expect our congregation or our team or our constituents to just deal with the pain of change. But we have not really internalized the pain of legitimately changing. And so therefore, many times the innovation is just lipstick, it's a Band-Aid. It's not really going to bring the cultural change you want. And then if it doesn't gain traction, we blame other people rather than internalizing and saying, okay, I don't think I really understood the measure of change I was looking for.
Oh, you mean you sprung that idea on your elders at the last minute and you didn't think that they were going to have any questions? What's wrong with you?
Yep.
That's good. Thank you.
Hey, Josh.
Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Yeah, I saw this play out over a long period of time in a church where it was essentially the blame game between the pastor and the congregation. And I remember having a pretty intense conversation with the pastor and just essentially saying, well, there are some churches that are making it happen. That means it's possible. That he had a really hard time owning that. And I think part of it is that it was kind of an old school mindset where being lead pastor was a status thing. And if you weren't lead pastor, you really weren't anybody in ministry. And so it just created a really unhealthy dynamic where he couldn't accept the areas where he needed to grow and innovate. And it really did a lot of damage, to the church as far as the ability to grow. So I've seen it play out firsthand, and I think it's a pretty common problem, and it really is identity rooted.
It's probably the most common problem as to why innovation doesn't happen, right? I think we think, oh, if I had a more creative team or if I had a more flexible congregation or people would just get on with things, but it's really the health of the leader. It's the soul health of that leader that really drives just about everything, because your soul is God's contact point for that team and for that church. But it's a lot easier and it feels good in the moment to make excuses rather than to go through the painful change of saying, God, search me, try me. In what way am I holding back this very thing that I say that I want?
Yeah. I mean, the last time we talked together, you had mentioned something about sometimes you end up having to clean up messes that where innovation starts and then you're like, like I think you gave the example of giving, where
Sure.
where you that balance between honoring the point and saying, hey guys, I think I need to speak into this a bit more, especially when you've delegated authority to do something. And at the same time, you need to, I think it's kind of around the concept where you said the language that builds the culture.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you effectively, especially with this mindset, that shift that you're talking about, and Josh was mentioning, how you want them to take responsibility for their actions, but at the same time, you got to own it. That language of saying, we're going to lean into something that's moving forward, rather than saying, what am I comfortable with? I think my question is, how do you find that balance, especially with teams that are just about learning the culture, just about saying, okay, we're going to start reaching for stuff that's outside of our playing area right now. How do you build that trust with your team?
I think one of the ways you build trust is by not pretending.
Right.
By speaking to what you see and you feel. You've got a unique perspective. But I think sometimes when things are not going well, leaders can try to pretend like it's not as bad as it is. Or I think in general, we mentally swing the pendulum from like it's either or. It has to be either or. Either I totally empower you and encourage you, or I'm controlling and corrective all the time. When the truth is, I actually need a bit of both. I love the song that Torrin Wells wrote about known, and he was talking about the grace of God. He said it's not one or the other. It's hardcore truth and also reckless grace. It's like it's both at the same time. So I think when you're working with your team, you're saying, listen, I empower you to do this. And I expect that you're going to make mistakes. But when you make mistakes, I'm not going to pretend like they were small mistakes or that, I think when you don't pretend, but just speak to it on both sides. Innovation happens when you have to bring correction and empowerment. You need both. With the giving example we gave in the last call, ultimately it was my mistake because I gave responsibility and empowerment to the team that made that decision, and then I had to circle back and change it. But that doesn't mean that I need to never empower them again. I have to have a healthy enough soul to say, hey, when they fail and it makes us all look bad, I have to absorb that. But then I also need to go to them and say, hey, this was good, this was not good. And I think just for innovation to constantly be happening, you cannot pretend about anything. You can't pretend. You can't pretend that it went perfectly. You can't pretend that it was an epic failure. You can't project it onto other people. You've just got to own as much as you possibly can and then circle back with those people and just have real conversations. And most people will really thank you for that. In fact, the greatest high capacity leaders and people that you really want around you, they'll get frustrated if you don't offer that to them because they know it wasn't amazing. And so I think when you don't pretend, it gives credibility to what you see. They know that you see reality, and it knows that you care about them enough to invest in them. Because if I didn't care enough about you, I wouldn't have that conversation with you because I'm not looking for a future together to lead together or build. But if I am going to have those difficult conversations, I'll say that I need you to interpret this as me investing in you in our relationship because I see this going somewhere long term. So I would say try to avoid the trap of thinking either or, because it really is both and. It's empowerment and circling back and being ruthlessly honest, is absorbing as much of the blame as you can when it doesn't go well, and being their biggest cheerleader as you can when it does.
Awesome. Thank you.
It's but you have to be healthy to do that, don't you? Right?
Yes.
You have to. Yeah. I can't live for that person's affirmation. I can't just try to be their buddy. I've got to be their spiritual leader. There's all kinds of internal things that have to just get working to do that well. So yeah, that's the healthy soul of the leader could be the biggest thing that innovation rises and falls on. Because if I am insecure, I'm going to control everything. And if I also, another sign of insecurity is I may not try to control everything. I may empower you, but if it doesn't go well, I'm going to blame you for everything out of my insecurity, or I'm going to pretend that it went better than it did so that we don't have to have that difficult conversation. So I think the chief innovator has got to be ruthlessly committed to not pretending. what I would say is we've only got a little bit of time before we jump into questions. Let me just give you 4 areas when you think about innovation, just as practical innovation. 3 of these areas I learned from watching a show on MSNBC called The Prophet. How many of you have seen The Prophet, where he turns around businesses? I think his name is Marcus Leonis or something like that. Anyways, he's a super serial entrepreneur, and he comes in and there's these failing businesses, and he helps them innovate and turn them around. And he says that every business has 3 areas. They have people, they have a process, and they have a product. And every ministry has those areas. We've got people, we've got systems and process, and we have a product. The product could be growing credential holders and hosting conferences. Your product could be healthy small groups. It could be good worship gatherings, whatever don't let the word product scare you just because it's business. But I added another P, and I put passions. I said there's passions, people, process, product. In the passion area of innovation, when I'm working with teams, the passions is all about the why. Give me the mission, vision, values. Give me the language of the culture. Sometimes you've got to go all the way back to the bedrock foundation of things if you really want to bring deep innovation. What are the passions that move you? Simon Sinek said, start with why, right? I have to start with why. Because in my immaturity, I would always start with what do we need to change? Or I would blame the who. Who are the people that are not making it happen? But let's go back to why. Why do we need innovation? We need innovation because people are waiting on the other side of our obedience. Because we cannot just settle in and get comfortable, or we're not going to reach more people, or whatever it is. So the passions, that's your why. The people, that's your who. Who are the people? Do they need to be newly trained? Do they need to have some new alignments? Do we need some new teams? Do we need some fresh voices? Who are the people that are bringing about the change and that you're trying to give a fresh culture to? Then the process, that's the how. That's the systems. I went to a whole seminar Craig Rochelle was doing on systems related to multi-site. He just kept saying, you could have the greatest vision in the world, but if you don't have systems to sustain it, systems are actually what sustain innovation. Otherwise, innovation is just like a flash in the pan. It's just here today, gone tomorrow. And good systems make an average leader look really great. But bad systems can cause a great leader look barely average. I've been around some great leaders in some great churches and environments, but their systems were terrible, and it made everybody look mediocre. And then I've been around some places where there was nobody that stood out to me as having this crazy, level 5 gifting in any area, but everything they did seemed to really work well, and it was synergized and aligned. It's because they had systems, and it just made everyone better. So there's the passions, the why, the people, the who, the process, the how. And then the product is the what. What are you going to change? What are you going to innovate? And sometimes, depending on the innovation, you may have to go through all 4 areas. Sometimes you can just drill down into one. But I would say, do the work, be patient, be resilient. I think we may have mentioned, when I was in grade school, they made the big announcement that we were going to change to the metric system. And as a kid, I remember thinking, okay, when's that going to happen? And then we halfway changed to the metric system, and we still kept our old English system. And now, unless it's math and science, we have this crazy mixture between yards and meters, and it's kind of all over the place because we didn't quite stick with the process and the pain and the cost of a major overhaul. So now we just have complexity and confusion with an old system and a new system kind of patched together. And that's why I say innovation really requires a lot of courage. It really requires a lot of resilience. We mentioned it in passing in our previous call, but the 5 stages of a seed, I want to make sure that you get this, because you have to have the courage and the resilience if you're going to bring real innovation and change. The 5 stages of a seed. The first stage of a seed is the planting. The planting. That's the burial. That's when you take the vision of innovation and you plant it in the hearts of your team. You pray about it, but it kind of disappears. And if you stop talking about it, nothing will happen. You cast vision for it, but really nothing's going to happen unless you follow up. The first stage is the planting. The second stage of a seed is the rooting. Again, it's invisible. Roots are going down. So now people are thinking about your ideas. They're going home and talking about it with their spouse. It's slowly getting into their heart, but it's still invisible. You don't see any change. And as a leader, you're like, hey, we've been talking about this for 6 months. How come nothing's happening? Well, you planted the vision for change. Now it's rooting into the cultural value system and hearts of people. The third stage of a seed is breakthrough. This thing pops through the soil, and you're like, oh my gosh, we've got change. People are actually doing, like, people are showing up to community groups. People are serving. Something's happening. Well, it's breakthrough, and you should celebrate the heck out of stage 3 breakthrough. There's fruit there, but do not settle for that or be deceived, because we're far from done. The fourth phase of a seed is an immature or tender plant begins to grow. And what can be deceiving about the immature or tender plant is that you can think you've got something that you don't have. You're like, oh my gosh, this leader is so developed and ready. I think we could launch a campus with them. I think we could send them to the mission field. I think we could make them the director of small groups, whatever it is. You probably could soon, but not yet. Because the fourth stage is it's an immature, tender plant. And if you put too much weight on it, it'll crumble. And what happens is when our ideas crumble, we think that the seed was wrong or the soil was wrong. No, we were just impatient. You got to give it time if you want lasting innovation. And then the fifth stage is you've got a mature plant. You've got something that's fruitful. You've got something that's viable and growing. You've got something now that's set in motion that really doesn't need as much attention. It's going to bear fruit. And so if you're willing to pay the price for innovation, make sure that you really like the seeds that you're sowing, and that you stick with it, because there really is those 5 stages with just about any kind of, I mean, people could look at those 5 stages in their personal growth goals, right? You set a goal to lose weight, 3 days later, you're not there. You're like ready to give up. Well, you're in the planting, the burial side of it. Those 5 stages have been incredibly encouraging for me. And this vision, this quote from Paul Johansson, I have thought about this so much. Paul Johansson said, when it comes to vision and innovation, God will give you vision by the mile, but you've got to take it by the foot. I found that to be so true. And I want to just kind of close with this story, and then we're going to go into some Q&A. A lady that I heard share at a I think it was a Chick-fil-A LeaderCast event years ago. Her name was Allison Levine, and Allison Levine was a girl raised in Phoenix. Her dad worked for, I think, the FBI. Just like she had a lot of health conditions. She had a condition called Wolff-Parkinson syndrome, where there was like an extra electrical pathway in her heart. So she could get dizzy, she could pass out, she could go into heart failure if she pushed herself cardio too much. All these different things were going on, but she made a decision as a little girl that she was going to be adventurous and she was going to push the limit and stretch herself. And so by the time she was like in her 20s, she had climbed the highest summit on every continent except for Mount Everest. And she said, I want to lead the first female team on an expedition up Mount Everest. Well, there are a lot of people that have lofty ideas for innovation, but to climb Mount Everest, you need more than a good pair of, Merrell boots and some trail mix. You know what I'm saying? Like you've got to have a plan and everything. So anyway, she planned and prepared and raised money and all this. And I listened to the story and I thought, you've got to be crazy. This mountain's like 29,000 feet up in the air. Just to get to base camp is 17,000 feet. Just to get to base camp. But the process she described of getting to the summit was even more frustrating, because she said you have to stay at base camp for 2 or 3 days for your lungs to acclimate to the change. Sometimes as leaders, we're so obsessed with going from place to place and change to change and rapid pace, people have to settle in. They got to adjust to the new climate, the new air. And she said, then we would go from base camp to camp 1. But once we got to camp 1, we had to stay there for 2 days to let our lungs acclimate. And then she said we had to go back down to base camp and stay there for a day or 2, because you can't just push your lungs at that thin air for that long. And then she said after base camp, we went to camp 1, spent another 2 days. Then we went to camp 2, a few thousand feet higher, spent another 2 days. Then we had to go back down to camp 1 to let our lungs rest and acclimate. Then we went back to base camp for a day. I'm thinking it's like 5,000 steps forward and 20,000 steps back. Like, what is happening? She said, then we'd go to camp 1 for a day. Then we go to camp 2 for a day. Then we go to camp 3, same process, stay for 2 days, then go back down to camp 2. There are 4 different camps above base camp before you get to the summit. Then the day came for them to get to the summit, and they were 200 feet from the highest peak on the planet. She had dreamt of going to Everest, but the weather pattern changed. And sometimes as a leader, you don't quite know what the variables are going to be. And it could be budgets, could be people move, people leave your team, whatever. Like, you have to adjust your timelines. And she said, I had to make the crucial decision as to whether or not we were going to quickly push ahead to go that last 200 feet, or we were going to turn back and go to camp to be safe. And she said, it's as devastating as it was. And we had been on that mountain for 2 months climbing, because that's the average time it takes. And oh, by the way, 1 in 9 people die trying to climb Everest, right? That's a pretty high ratio. So she decided to turn back. So they got to within 200 feet of their goal and they turned back. And she said this. She said, getting to the summit, getting to my goal was optional. Everybody returning home safely was mandatory. She prioritized the people over this obsessive goal that she had in her head. And I'm telling you, people can tell the difference when you're a leader that leads really valuing people. You want change, and you're going to challenge the heck out of them, and you're going to hold on to relentlessly to that goal, but you're not going to sacrifice them in the process just so that you can insecurely reach something. Because let's be honest, many times the goals that we think will bring contentment to us or validation that we feel like we've done a good job, it's really just a mirage. The church that wants to grow to 500 or 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000, it's just a mirage to think you're actually going to feel so content when you get there. In fact, Allison came back a couple years later and she made it all the way to the summit with a whole nother group of people. And she said, I stood there on the top of the world looking around the Himalayan mountain range. And she says, to be honest with you, it was pretty anticlimactic. She said it wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. It wasn't as dramatic or emotional. And she said, I realized that the journey was the destination. And it wasn't just the place that you climb to, it's the person you become along the way. And so I just want to challenge you. Sometimes we're desperate for innovation because we need to do things bigger, better, faster, cooler. And we've really got to drill down and ask ourselves why. And be real about that issue of contentment, because otherwise we may treat the people around us with unhealthy pressure. And I think it's just God gives you vision by the mile, but you got to take it by the foot. And so I hope that you take some perseverance out of our conversations with innovation, because if we don't change some things, things die and we don't reach the people we need to reach. But we can't obsess about innovation to the point where we compromise our character, or we don't like the person we're becoming in the process. Because, they call it in the business world a rat race. Well, you don't want to be the biggest rat, and you don't want to be ahead of that race, because it's who you become in the process of leading people through innovation that God ultimately looks down on and favors. So let's pause and open things up for about 10 minutes or so for some Q&A.
Well, Pastor Josh, appreciate all that you've shared. Just could you maybe hit on what it looks like just to be personally healthy in some of those areas, or just some simple how-tos, because you talked about there just the idea of the rat race and not wanting to become that rat, and all that. What are just some good things to really maybe, or some questions to step back and ask yourself, or just so that you're living from that place of a restored soul, a healthy soul, and that greatness of soul?
Yeah. I think a couple of practical things come to my mind. Don't push away all your critics. Don't dismiss them prematurely. There may be a kernel of truth in what they're saying. Maybe not. Sometimes what a critic sends is garbage and you need to just toss it. But sometimes you really need to take it. And sometimes you got to ask your wife, or you've got to ask an elder or somebody you trust, hey, is there any truth to this? A lot of times when you're initiating change and innovation, people in the church will complain, and we just want to toss those complaints out and keep moving. And part of that is good and resilient, and part of it is unwise. Part of it we should say, what can I learn from this? I think as long as we don't assume that we see clearly or we see everything, especially ourselves. And so I think one question that is really scary to ask, but is good to ask somebody you trust: what's it like to serve with me? What's it like? John Maxwell said, what's it like to be on the other side of me in a conversation? Wow, you want to raise your self-awareness. Start asking a few people, what's it like to be on the other side of me? Because, man, when you're feeling the pressure, like change is needed, sometimes it doesn't bring the best out in you. And your team will trust you and love you and bond with you and protect you and lead change aggressively if you are not willing not to pretend. And if you're willing to be vulnerable and say, guys, I'm sorry, I really blew it. I got aggravated with you when that didn't happen, or I was impatient. Just recently, my senior leader came into a meeting and he said, guys, I need to repent to you guys. I've been impatient with our team, and I realized I was insecurely driving to a metric that wasn't even something God was requiring of us. And I'm sorry for you just feeling that indirectly coming out of me. Man, that takes a lot of courage. Not a lot of people are going to pick up stones and throw at that leader when they're willing to. What happens is we attract more problems when people think we're blind. They're like, okay, you didn't feel the pebble I threw at you. Now here's the brick. And so I think just assuming that we don't see everything fully, surrounding yourself with some people that will be honest with you, and having the courage to ask those questions. Because a lot of times I would like to just blindly lead forward, or I would dismiss the critic. And I realized, no, that was my own immaturity. And I'm not going to let them grab the steering wheel, and I'm not going to let their foot be on the gas pedal or the brake. But I do need to know, God, are you trying to say something to me? And I have to be honest with what really is going to bring contentment. The goal is really to be content, but not satisfied. Like, I have to be content with who I am in God and with what he's given me, and grateful. When you're desperate for innovation, many times gratitude goes out the window. And I think you have to fight for gratitude. At times I've had to list to myself the things I'm grateful for in the midst of the frustration of wanting innovation. In fact, I just learned 2 weeks ago, Erwin McManus was talking about how neuroscientists are saying now that gratitude actually is the oil and the lubricant of your brain. It actually softens the tissue in your brain when you have intentionally gratitude, thoughts filled with gratitude. It softens the neuroplasticity for creativity and for fresh thinking. So when you think about it, innovation requires gratitude at a neurological level, not just a spiritual level. So those are a couple of things that have helped me. That's a great question.
Hey, Josh, it seems to me like with innovation, you can have a good idea and maybe even a good plan to implement, but if you have the wrong people, maybe either the character doesn't fit or the gift doesn't fit or something like that, it can derail things. Can you talk a little bit about getting the right people in the right places and how that process plays out?
Yeah. So I think the greatest resource, I'm more convinced of it now than I was 15 years ago. If you have the right people, you will be able to develop the right culture, and those right people will build the right systems, and those right people will not sabotage your authority out of their insecurity. When someone complains and they're like, yeah, I don't want to do that either, but so-and-so, Pastor Josh says we got to do this. So, you know what I mean? Like, the right people bring it all together. The right people come up with ideas. The right people are willing to show up and keep getting healthier. The right people are willing to let you confront them because they want to grow. The right people are willing to challenge you and ask questions. I will say this too. Craig Rochelle said, we don't just go find the right people, we form them. A lot of people want to try to hire and buy and bring in, and to develop the right people takes a long time. And it takes this commitment of I'm not going to tell myself stories about who you are. I'm going to keep showing up and having difficult conversations. And and if you settle and get comfortable, I'm going to send you to a conference, a round table, a mastermind group. I'm going to make sure you're challenged and stretched to grow. Another conversation our senior leader recently had, there was a problem that came up that we needed to have some innovation related to some rapid growth, and systems were breaking because reaching people and all good things. But he said, listen, I brought you guys around this table and pay you well and recruited you and everything else to solve problems. I'm not going to try to solve this problem. I need you guys to think of a solution and let me know what you think is going to fix it. And I just love the fact that he moves in deference and expects a lot from us, because he said, hey, everything's going to rise and fall on the people I surround me. And so it's important for us to know who is around our table and make some changes if it's not working. We've got to be honest with people if it's not working. And if it is working, then I think we just keep pouring gasoline and fertilizer on that, because the best systems in any organization are going to come from good people. And there's a lot of times when I've gone into different departments to see what's happening, and I'll say, I didn't even know we were doing it that way. Who came up with that idea? I love that, right? What was the people? If you get the right people, they take initiative. And so it's totally right. You can have an amazing vision, and God could give you that vision, but if you can't cultivate the right team to do it, again, it goes back to Bill Parcells from the Giants, right? He said, don't blame me for the meal if I don't get to pick the groceries. Like, I should have to pick. If you're requiring me to win, then let me pick the players that I want to work with in my system and in my culture.
Yeah, I mean, this whole idea of cultivating the right people. I mean, and just sometimes it's just for where I'm at. It sometimes is, you feel like you've moved to the next level, but then you're again going back to camp one.
Oh, no doubt.
And then you got to go back up, and then you lose someone along the way, and then you're like, okay, we got to get a new somebody in that spot. It's people who understand the language you use, but then also where you want to go with it. So it's not just talk, and I think that's, especially in modern church in general, people love the talk. They don't necessarily want to walk the walk. And that's where I think I found in my, just to kind of speak to some of what Bob was asking as well, I found that that's how I often find the right people, is to see whether they're willing to walk it with me first rather than talk it.
I think the fastest way to attract the right people to your life is to get radically clear on what God's called you to do and build and create in your value system, and begin to speak that, manifest that, show that, model that. It's the whole saying that your vibe attracts your tribe. I think God will send you people around you. Not everybody that's attracted to your life is called to build with you, but the people that are called to build with you, God will send them when you're ready, when he knows you're not going to mishandle them. Because it took tremendous grace for Jesus to develop Peter. A lot of times he acted like Simon, and sometimes he acted like Peter, and sometimes he would vacillate back and forth. And I listened to one leader last week talk about, Peter denied Jesus and left him, but so did Judas. And it takes incredible discernment to know the difference between a Judas and a Peter, because on the surface level, we would treat them the same, and we would lose out on one of the greatest apostles in history. And so I think we need, again, it comes back to the health of my soul. I've got to discern who these people really are. And as a leader, I've got to be so anchored to say, you know what? I know people are going to come and go. And I know people are going to get on the bus and get off the bus at every stop. And that's tough. And I would love for them to be on the bus the whole time. But that's not realistic. But if I can keep growing and I can keep changing in my mindset, in the transformed mind, the more I model that and the more I live that, and the spiritual life that comes off of me, that vibe is going to attract my tribe. And you have to just trust God to send you those people. David transformed 400 misfits in the cave of Adullam because God had access. I mean, they were in debt, they were corrupt, they were criminals, right? And then all of a sudden you fast forward a decade later, and it said that the weakest of them could lead 100 men effectively, and the greatest could lead 1,000. And there were these champions. Well, it was because David was growing as a person, far from perfect, but what was in him was attractive to those people, and they grew with him. But they didn't look like much when they showed up. I want to leave you guys with one quote. I'm going to send Josh my notes too, so you guys you can use it however you want. But Brian Houston said this. He said, "Be more loyal to the future than to the past. Don't become a memorial of better days gone by." And there's a guy from, in his 60s who started the Hillsong movement, and at any point in time could have just stopped and celebrated. And he's saying, I want to be more loyal to the future than I am a memorial to the past. And I think that's a good word for all of us, because it's really not just about us. It's not about our moment. It's really about our faithfulness, so that future generations can keep innovating and taking it further. And the things that we set out to see fruitful, continue to go in that way. And so I just want to leave you with that thought. And thanks for the investment of your time. I'm glad that you guys are getting on these huddles. I hope you jump on with Pastor Chris and just some of the other ones that are coming up on teams.
That's awesome.